Welcome to ACC Nation, featuring sports news and special guest interviews. Here's Will Ojanen and Jim Quist.
So Jason, it's good to have you on again. Let's kind of get right into it. You have a new bracket out on big-underdog.com as of Tuesday, and let's just get right into it. It feels like the top four seed, overall number one seeds, UConn, Purdue, Houston, and Arizona. It feels like there's a gap between those four teams and the rest of the field. What I'm saying is I think it's going to be hard for another team at the moment to jump up and knock one of those other teams out. Where do you stand on that?
I agree. Jim and Will, thanks again for having me on. It's really good to see you guys. I would agree, Will. So, those four teams have separated themselves, especially Purdue, Houston, and UConn. And in part of that is just the number of kind of quality wins that they've got, right? So you're approaching kind of almost double digit quad one wins for Houston, Purdue, and UConn. There's a bit of a drop off after that, like you said, because you get into that second tier where you have the Tennessees, you have the Kansas, you have teams like that. And quite honestly, while they've had wonderful seasons at North Carolina, they haven't been as dominant on the road. They haven't kind of carried those wins and those metrics on the road and really separated themselves.
Yeah, so we'll stick with the Tar Heels real quick, and I think they're in kind of an interesting case because you talked about it. They were at one point they were 17-3 and 9-0 in the league, and then they kind of hit a little lull. They lost to Georgia Tech, obviously beat Duke, which is great for the resume. Lost to Clemson, barely beat a kind of become a bad Miami team, lost to Syracuse. And it just feels like it's kind of the state of the ACC as a whole is you really never know what you're going to get for any team on one given night.
I would agree with that, Will. One of the interesting things about Carolina is they don't turn you over. So while they're a top 10 defense in the country, they don't generate turnovers. So because they don't generate turnovers, once in a while, they're going to run into teams that shoot the ball well from the perimeter. And when they have those types of games, that's when they struggle. They're 296 in the country at generating turnovers, and they're the 10th best defense in the country, which is kind of a crazy statistic. Offensively, they've relied on they don't turn the ball over very much, and they've shot the ball from the perimeter a lot better this year. They're in that every other kind of home and away, just like most teams in the country right now, where you settle into late February. They're in the kind of win one, lose one stretch. But their body of work overall, especially early in the season, has kind of carried them through.
It's weird to say that you can argue that this is the worst Kansas team in quite some time, yet they're sitting at 20-6 overall and 8-5 in what's been a really tough Big 12. But it just feels like they've had some, where they lost on the road at Kansas State. Granted, it was in overtime, and it kind of goes into what you talked about just a moment ago. It's really difficult to win on the road this year, but it just feels like this Kansas State is missing something, or Kansas, I should say. This team is missing something this year.
You'll get fake for that.
Yeah. You gotta be careful here. I live in KC. Living in KC, the way Kansas is, watching Kansas right now in the middle of the regular season was kind of like watching the Chiefs play towards the kind of the middle to later stage of the regular season. Kansas, and they're never going to admit this, they're a bit bored. They have a bunch of experienced players. Dickinson came over from Michigan, a lot of really good McCullers from Tech, a lot of really good experienced players. And they are not, especially when they go on the road, they are not exuding the effort that it takes to win on the road in the Big 12. Big 12 is fantastic this year. And so they know that their season, it's almost like they're pacing themselves. They know that their season is going to be graded on one thing and one thing only, March Madness. And you can kind of see them pacing themselves to get to March Madness. They're still going to end up somewhere in that 2-3 seed range. So like you said, it's a bad year for Jayhawks fans, but I think if there were a stock, you could almost buy them low now.
That's an interesting way to put that. When you say bored, I mean, do you think that's a conscious effort on the part of coaching, or are the players kind of pacing themselves?
I think it's pacing, right? one of the greatest coaches in the history of college basketball. So I probably shouldn't use the term bored, but that's the reality. I think the players are pacing themselves. We're in the era of NIL. They're trying to pace themselves. They're trying to make sure that they stay healthy, that they're not hurt for the stretch run. And I think they're just, Harris at times has been the point guard, DeJuan Harris, who's fantastic. One of Self's favorites over the years. He's been dinged up. They're trying to get healthy, and they're trying to do that, and really with an eye on March.
I could get into just about every team that you've got listed here in your latest bracket, which came out, by the way, on the 20th. Just if you want to take a look at this, big underdog is the way to go. Take a look at what Jason has for his most recent bracket. He's going to be updating this on a regular basis. And as we get closer and closer to conference tournaments, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of churn going on in the bracket as well. Let's skip down to number 3 seed. We'll take a look at Duke here in just a moment, but I want to talk about Baylor for a second. Just as you point out, a blistering, and that's quoting you, a blistering 3-point shooting team at 42%. Mm-hmm. Talk about how much potential Baylor has from the standpoint of, okay, if you want to talk about where they're going to go, is this a team that has the potential for being a national champion?
I think from afar, they're going to be a trendy pick, because when you watch them play, some days they're lights out. When they shoot the ball well, and they usually do, they're fantastic. But like we've talked about on years past, when teams don't carry both the offense and the defensive efficiency in that 50 or under, they tend to get beat in that Sweet 16 realm, or even that Elite 8 realm. And their defense right now that they're carrying is 85th. So that's the alarm. That's the one you got to be careful. At times, they simply don't get the stops late in the game. They shoot the ball well, but they don't always guard. And they've struggled at times this year guarding the perimeter. And while I think a lot of people are big on Baylor, and they're, like I said, they're going to be trendy because they're not, they're kind of, everybody is on certain teams, but that's one of those schools where it's kind of fun to pick them. I'm not as big on Baylor. Listen, I think they're really, really good. Scott Drew is fantastic. I'm not as big on them because of their defense.
Alabama, I really can't skip over them as much as I would like to. But when you have a net ranking of 5, even though you had a rough start to your season, this team and the last couple of years has just been coming on strong and is a threat no matter what. Talk to us about what you're seeing there so far this season.
It's the Nate Oates school of mathematical basketball, right? He's an old math teacher, and they're really interesting to watch play because he mandates this. You can shoot as many threes as you want that night, but you're not taking shots just inside the 3-point line. You're either taking the ball to the hoop or you're shooting a 3. He keeps it really simple and mathematical. When they were 6-5 this year, earlier in the year, they were still in the top 14 of the net, which is crazy, right? And because their offense has been so efficient, and right now it's still the best offense in the country. They can shoot the ball really from anywhere, but they're efficient because they either going to get 3 points or they're going to get a layup. And that's why offensively they're good. I think you're going to see, kind of a side note, you're going to see a trend in the future when you take a team like Texas A&M, who is vastly talented, a lot of really good players, but doesn't take good shots. You're going to see schools really study how Alabama runs their offense. And you're going to see teams start to introduce that as well. Bama's got a really high ceiling because they always score. But again, the underlying current for them is, are they going to guard and get the stops that they need? They're in the 70s in the defense. So keep an eye on that number, right? If you want to pick Bama to go all the way, keep an eye on them and watch how they finish the last 6 games of the year if they start to guard a little bit better and get that number in the 50s.
I've seen coaches who have math backgrounds, who are big into stats, use that approach effectively. It's almost like Billy Ball in Oakland A's,
Yeah.
Moneyball, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That same approach. And amazingly, it works. And there's software out there that you can play, it's been there for years that you can plug in enough stats into it. You've got a good idea what your players are going to do and what they can do and where they're going to deliver. And you can start forcing them into that groove and deliver. And apparently that's what he's doing there. On the number 3 seed, you've got Duke. And we keep seeing Duke kind of, it's a roller coaster thing going on a little bit here. They've got their ups and their downs. They've got some issues here that really gives me pause as to how far they can go. Give us your impression.
Well, the committee likes him already. I had him as a 4 seed. The committee said, you're already good enough to be a 3 seed, which I thought was one of the kind of the subtle surprises with the committee reveal the top 16 teams over the past weekend. Listen, it's 1 seed line, not a huge deal at this stage, but you can tell the committee already likes them. And, when you watch them play, they haven't really been fantastic at any point this year, but they've never really been bad. Like you said, they're kind of in that middle ground. They've gathered up wins, Baylor and Michigan State, Wake, Clemson, Pitt, things like that. One of the things that is maddening to me when I watch Duke play is Jeremy Roach is a really good college basketball player. Like he's a really good player. If I'm John Shire and I'm watching him play year after year after year, and he's shooting 45% from 3, then he's got to shoot more than 3 attempts a game from 3. And it's crazy as it sounds. Sometimes it's as simple as this. Your really good players got to get your shots. And at times with Duke, it's Filipowski gets his and some of the other players get theirs, but Roach isn't shooting enough. He's been out. He's played a lot of really big games at Duke, and he's a 4th-year senior. They got to turn over the keys, and he's got to be more aggressive offensively, get the ball to the hoop. And when not, like we said with Bama, they got to shoot more threes, as crazy as it sounds, because they've got to get points in volume. We saw them stall a little bit at Clemson when they squeaked it out at home. And then, Pitt came in there and beat them when they really struggled offensively from the perimeter.
You're confirming something that I've been feeling, and I haven't been able to put it into words. It just feels like there's a wet blanket on them offensively. They just don't seem to be as aggressive offensively as I think they could be and maybe should be. That's my perspective. Will, let's keep it rolling here.
All right, so move down to the 4 line. You got a team that just a year ago was in the championship game in San Diego State, who is because they're in the Mountain West, they're a little under the radar, but have had another really strong season. They have a couple nice wins that have aged well. St. Mary's after that win has aged really well, and obviously the Mountain West in general is good this year. So what makes San Diego State so good?
It's been a good question. It's been like this for several years now with them. It's their defense, and they hang their hat on that defense. The Mountain West this year has been maybe the most entertaining conference. They're probably looking between 5 to 6 bids, potentially 6. San Diego State's ahead of the class because they've picked one thing. They know defensively they're going to keep them in the game every year. And they're playing with a little more confidence this year, right? Because they have the backing of the Final Four run last year, which, the games are really, really close. Charleston almost got them in the first round last year. They survived that, right? And then they made all the way to the Final Four. Jaden Ledee has been a top, he's been a top 5 player statistically. In Ken Palm, he's the 4th ranked best player MVP voting in the league. He's transferred from Ohio State and TCU, and he's offensively he's grown tremendously. He's always had that strength, but now he's starting to shoot the ball a little bit better from the perimeter. Their defense top 10 in the country. Their offense is kind of plugging along. They really struggle from the perimeter, but like they always do, they rebound the ball well and they guard.
Auburn's a team that kind of intrigues me. They're good on both ends of the court, but we've also seen they've kind of hit a little bit of a wall lately. And their losses aren't bad necessarily. I mean, losing to Kentucky, at home is a little bit of a head scratcher, but that was coming off the heels of a 40-point win over a really good South Carolina team.
Yeah, well, I mean, Auburn is 7th in the net. So for kind of the casual listeners, net is the kind of the prescribed ranking system from the NCAA. The NCAA, Board of Governors, they release that. So they believe, and the team sheets, that Auburn is 7th in that. Ken Palm, which is kind of an analytical statistical database, has them 5th. Those are crazy numbers for a team, to be honest, that really only has kind of one top tier win all year. They beat Alabama at home, which is a really, really good win, like we talked about. But then after that, their next best win is at Ole Miss, bubble team, maybe, on the fringe. And then, with Texas A&M, who's been disappointing, and Virginia Tech, who likely won't make the tournament. So the computers, this is kind of where we start to get into the season of what do the computers say and what do our eyes say and what do the results say. The computers say Auburn is a top 8 team, without a doubt. They guard, they score, they do all these things. But then the reality is they're not going to be seated as highly as maybe some people anticipate because they don't have the body of work. They're one of those teams. They're really going to have to make a run in the SEC tournament to try to stay in that 2 and 3 seed range. Otherwise, they might pop up as a 4 or 5 seed, and everybody's gonna be like, "Well, I thought they were top 10, but they're not. They don't have the quality of wins yet."
I'm gonna move over to the 5 line, and this is where I'm like, I look at the 5 seeds, and I'm like, there could be a lot of 12-5 upsets
Yeah.
this year. But the one that I like of the 4 that you have at big-underdog.com is Dayton. This is the team who obviously had their best season wiped out by the pandemic, and this has been their best season since, sitting currently at 21-4, but they have a nice 8-4 record in the first 2 quadrants. So tell us
Yep.
a little bit about the Flyers and what they bring to the table, because this is a team that I honestly don't know a whole lot about.
Yeah, we talked about player of the year, and Deron Holmes is second nationally in Ken Palm's MVP voting. So I mean, a player from Dayton, again, Obi Toppin type of player. He's been really, really good for Dayton. Uh, Dayton has a top 20 offense, and what they do is they shoot the ball from the perimeter really well. They're 7th in the nation in 3-point shooting. So they spread you out, and they really shoot the ball well. Their defense kind of keeps them in the game, and they don't really have any of the bad losses up front. And the A10, and this is the way that's been the last couple of years, has been down. So they are just gobbling up wins. And we're at the point of the season when the vast majority of the teams in major conferences, you split your week. You win your home game and you lose your road game. Now, of course, there's exceptions to the rule there, but by and large, a lot of teams are acquiring losses, and Dayton just kind of keeps cruising along. And so at the end of the year, like, well, their non-conference schedule is in the top 50, and all right, well, they got some decent wins, and their road record's really good, and they've only got 4 losses. So they're 21-4. So you start to look at it, they're going to win their conference. They're 21-4. They're not acquiring bad losses. They kind of are working, and they have a really good star player. They're going to kind of work their way into that top tier without a ton of really good wins. One of the underlying wins of the season is way back in early November, the second day of the season, Northwestern beat Dayton. So that didn't seem like a big game back then, but ask Northwestern fans now. Their best win, last thing on Dayton, their best win is a road win at SMU, according to the net, but they're a 4 seed. Again, sometimes there's a perception of the A10, which I think is the perception's better than the reality. And they're just going to, the volume of wins is going to carry them.
Clemson, let's get into them, because I have made it known on this podcast for a long time that I'm not the biggest Brad Brownell fan. I feel like he doesn't get the most out of this team, even though this has been his most talented team probably since the one that made the second weekend 6 years ago. PJ Hall's a really good player. Joe Girard provides a nice deep threat, but I just don't feel like they have a whole lot else, and they're also, I feel like they're a team that can also be beat on any given night. So why is Clemson so high?
They're hanging their hat on 2 top 10 road wins. And the committee has said, listen, if you're going to go on the road and you're going to schedule, which they finally did, Clemson historically, as we've talked about in the last couple of years when I've been able to fortunately talk with you guys, their strength of the non-conference strength of the schedule was always in that like 250, 300 range. This year, they finally said, listen, we got a pretty good team. We're going to schedule. So this year, their non-conference strength of the schedule is 67. So they scheduled, check. And then they won at Bama and they won at North Carolina. And that is just holding their profile up there. And when you get multiple big time road wins like that, you're going to soar up the ranks. Also, kind of the underlying current of a pretty good neutral court win against TCU and a really good Boise State team. So they've got some really solid, not spectacular after that, but really solid wins. And they are able to absorb even kind of a Tech loss or an NC State loss because of those really, really high ranking wins. At times they struggle offensively, they get a bit stagnant, and defensively, what hurts them is they don't, again, they're another one of those teams. They just guard, they come back, they guard, they play defense, but they don't generate turnovers. So they don't get easy shots. So when your guards aren't great and you don't generate turnovers, you can look pretty stagnant against set defenses, especially in the ACC that's scouted so well.
So before I get any further here, I just want to run down the release of that top 16 by the selection committee. Yep. And get your impressions on, whether you think this was a good list or there were some teams on here that maybe shouldn't be, or maybe they should be a little higher. Purdue, UConn, Houston, Arizona, all number 1 seeds. Those are the top 4 teams. Yep. I don't think there's any, I would assume there's no disagreement there. Then North Carolina at number 5, Tennessee at 6, Marquette at 7, and Kansas at 8.
Yep. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking as well. Yep.
Okay. Then at number 9, Alabama 10, Baylor, Iowa State at 11, and 12, Duke.
Yep. Duke was the one, we talked a little bit earlier. Duke was the one I was a bit surprised that they snuck up to that seed because they've had some losses. They've absorbed at Arkansas, Georgia Tech loss early in the year. Duke was a bit of a surprise. The other one is, I think that one of the biggest telling signs we saw from that top 16 bracket is San Diego State. Like Will, like you mentioned, because San Diego State was in that, they're saying this: we understand that a Mountain West team that already has at that time 6 losses, including one to Grand Canyon, who's very good this year. But a Mountain West team with 6 losses is still one of the best 6 teams in the country. That's a really good sign for all the Mountain West schools. That means Nevada, New Mexico, Utah State, Colorado State. Those teams are more likely now a chance to get in the tournament if they're on the bubble. That was the biggest telling sign from the top 16 release.
The other teams, of course, Auburn, San Diego State, then Illinois and Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I had a little question of those last 2 teams, actually. How do you feel?
Yeah, Wisconsin's a really fun one because, with the way we are now, right, we are prisoners of the moment. And so, we look at the AP poll and we look at, the number that people have voted them at and like, oh, they're ranked, 6. So we storm the court. We're based on this, when the reality is the NCAA tournament is not about the Associated Press poll. There could be a team, and there have been teams in the last 10 years ranked right at this time of the year, ranked in that 20 to 25 range that have not made the tournament. So we got to be careful with the Associated Press rankings because it's about your body of work. And the reality is, Wisconsin has really struggled, right? They've lost 6 out of the last 8, and they look very, very, very disorganized, especially offensively of late. But then you look at it, and they have 6 quad 1 wins and 6 quad 2. They're making the tournament, and they're going to be in pretty good shape in the tournament because not many teams have beaten Marquette, Michigan State twice, right? Virginia and some of these other kind of middle tier Big Ten teams. So they've acquired a lot of really good wins, and the NCAA tournament committee has been steadfast in it is about your body of work for the entire season. It's not the last 10 to 12 games like it used to be. Every game gets evaluated the same. And because of that, Wisconsin has a chance. I think they're going to keep slipping a little bit. I think they still have a chance for, that 5 and 6 seed range when people are looking at it and say, man, they've really struggled lately.
Question: do you think that's was a good direction for them to go?
I think,
You
yeah,
know, I
good.
mean, but yeah. Hey, let me throw more in here because, uh, I think everybody's got a different opinion on this one. But after a year or two of watching something like this, you begin to see how a team can start out really hot
Yeah.
and then cold, and vice versa. So I understand the body of work aspect, but at the same time, I worry about the teams that start out hot and in cold, and whether or not they really ought to be in the tournament at all.
Absolutely. I believe, Jim, part of it is it's college basketball wanting to stay relevant in November and December. And I think they want to try to cultivate some really good non-conference games to attract the eyeballs, to kind of keep generating interest in the sport, to get those quality wins, and then reward teams for doing it rather than back in their scheduling. Talk about the Big 12 scheduling if we want, but I think that's what it is. And also, it is a way. Listen, the committee's been steadfast. The last 12 doesn't matter, and your non-conference strength of scheduling really matters. We're going to see the test fit now on the Big 12 this year, but those are the two big things. I believe it was a way to just stay relevant in the kind of the football, NFL, college football season, and make sure that teams are really going on the road or going to a neutral site and generating interest.
Okay, so let's say that the end of the season doesn't matter. Is there a reason to have a tournament? I mean, not the NCAA tournament, but
Yeah,
conference tournaments.
TV and money, right? That's why those have existed as long as they have.
Simple answer.
That's an honest assessment, because let's be honest, at that stage, especially a wonderful sport, and this is our favorite, right? A wonderful sport that is so heavily analytical. There's 30 some games of data here, and we know the teams that have deserved to make it thus far. There's a couple bubble and it could swing one way or the other, but we could easily have a cutoff a week earlier and have plenty of statistical information to value whether teams should get in or not. I think it goes back to generating some interest, building up March Madness, and obviously the money.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about a couple of teams out of the ACC that fit that profile of maybe, maybe not. Just out of respect to your son, who you introduced us to earlier before we got started here, tell us about Texas Tech, his favorite team.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. To be pretty pumped about this. The Red Raiders. So, a few years ago they had Coach Beard and then Coach Adams, and they were built on defense, right? They were really built on that. Grant McCaslin has come over from North Texas, so he has the roots in the recruiting from Texas, but he's brought a little bit more of an up-tempo style to the Big 12. Earlier in the year, you could see they were just kind of still trying to find it, but now they've grown into a wonderful offensive team. They're in the top 15, and that's not easy to do in the Big 12. And their defense has come along throughout the year. They're really quality team. Pop Isaacs is one of the most entertaining players in the country. So if you stop and kind of watch him play, there's no shot that he doesn't like. So he's been really good. Trissant's been really good as well. They're a really entertaining team that have held their own in a tough Big 12.
All right, you can be brutally honest with us here. There's no sort of inside pressure on you from your son going, "Hey, Dad, you got him at 6. Move him up just a little bit more.
I know,
Dad.
yeah.
Come on, Dad."
They probably will. They probably will over time. They nice win against TCU yesterday. So the next update, which probably come Friday, they might be up there. Yeah, there's always a little bit of pressure in house with V. So
Be patient, son. Be patient. Will.
All right, I'm going to start cherry picking a little more because otherwise we'll be here all night, and
which is also okay. That's
yeah.
Okay.
Some of us have other things going on that we have to tend to, but we have to be adults. But I feel like you're higher on Michigan State than a lot of bracketologists are. You have them currently on the 7 line. I know they just took another loss recently, and it just doesn't feel like the same Michigan State team this year. Why is that?
Yeah. So, I was able to go to the Big Ten preseason media day in Minneapolis, and it was really interesting. Yeah, Will, you're home.
Yeah.
You're home. So it was really interesting to hear Izzo. He knew he had a really good team. He knew he had people coming back that were fantastic. He knew he had some leaders and some depth and some and some experience. And I think if you kind of pressed him quietly, he'd be incredibly disappointed in the year, like you're saying, Will. They remind me a little bit of the Illinois team from last year that had Terrence Shannon and Hawkins. And you would watch Illinois last year and you're like, they're Final Four good, right? Terrence Shannon is fantastic. And then they end up at an 8-9 game with Arkansas, who was kind of their mirror image. And, they got beat in the first round. Michigan State's a little bit like that. All right. So if you take Michigan State, kind of boil it down, and you look at, let's see why Michigan State is good or bad. Every metric you can find, they're really good except for free throw shooting. Like, they're really good statistically, but they lose a lot of close games in part because they don't shoot free throws very well. And it is an Achilles heel, and it is hurting them. You go back to their losses, right off the bat, the first night of the year, James Madison got them by 3. You just kind of go through a lot of close losses. Illinois, even Minnesota, lately Iowa. They struggle at the line, and you can tell it's a confidence thing at this point. It's a confidence thing, and they know that they are underachieving, and they're really pressing. I will say this though, when the calendar turns to March, and you get in the Big Ten tournament, if they're an 8 or 9 seed and they're staring at an Arizona or one of those schools, they absolutely could make a run because they've got quality players with experience.
Florida Atlantic is one of the more interesting resumes out there. We've seen them at their best. They beat Arizona in what could have possibly be one of the best games of the entire season.
Absolutely.
And then you see them on the other end where they lose to Bryant or Florida Gulf Coast. Now, this is pretty much almost the whole team that came back from that miracle Final Four run this year, but it just feels, I don't know if they're in the same way like you talked about with Kansas. They're just going through the motions right now, but what is it about Florida Atlantic this year?
So last year's Florida Atlantic team that surprised a lot of people, they almost didn't survive, round 1 with Memphis, but they did, and they had a fantastic run. It helped that Fairleigh Dickinson beat Purdue, but nonetheless, Florida Atlantic was really, really, really good last year. But if you look at what they were last year, they were 22nd offensively in the nation. Fantastic. They were 34th defensively. Okay. That's 22 and 34. This year, 13 offensively. Great, right? Pretty similar, but great. Defensively, they're 100th. Like you said, Will, very similar roster. They are not guarding. And there's really not a rationale on why they're not, but it's been their defense that have held them back. They've played games against a Wichita State and, a North Texas, and they're just giving up way too many points than what they should be with a similar roster.
All right, I've been holding off for a while, so now I got to ask about it, and that's Virginia, a team that all of a sudden forgot how to play offense. Now, if there's a team that needs to take some pages out of Alabama's offensive playbook, it's Virginia. I watch this team too much and see them settle for too many, mid-range jumpers, and it just is not a very efficient offense. Defense has been really good. I mean, save for Monday night in Blacksburg, but for the most part, it's been really good. Held a really good Wake Forest team to 47 points. Held the corpse of Miami to 36 points, I think it was here a couple of weeks ago. And then they went from almost a borderline lock to they're kind of teetering. Where do you stand on Virginia right now?
Yeah, really good question. They've went from starting the year off at 9-1, top 4 type seed to coming completely out. Then, like you said, kind of working your way back to a 7 seed, which is pretty safe in mid-February, not locked, but pretty safe. And now right back to the bubble. We know that Tony Bennett's one of the best coaches in the country, right? Like he fundamentally can absolutely coach. So they're practicing offense well, and they're running sets and all those things. And their shooting percentage is 278th in the country. I mean, offensively, they are a nightmare. Like you said, defensively, they're top 10, they're 9th in the country. They guard every piece of it. They guard, they block, they do all those types of things. They keep people off the boards. But when you're going to shoot that poorly, which they do, you're going to shoot 270 in the country, you better rebound. And they don't rebound either. They're 282nd in rebounding. So they're not getting second chance points. They're not getting first chance points. And then when you go on the road in tough environments where shooting is difficult and you start squeezing the ball a little bit tighter when you're down 8 and 10 points late in the game, that's the recipe for scoring 45, 48, 52 points in road games. The pace they play is so slow. They got to make shots. You got to make shots at some point, and they haven't done that.
And when you need to seal a game in the free throw line, they cannot do that either.
Really good point. Yeah, Will, really good. Yep.
Okay, a couple more, and we gotta let you go here. I'm fascinated because there's a couple of teams here at the back end of the bracket that are in the at large point, and one of them's Nebraska. Kind of out of nowhere, they've done a really good job. They beat Purdue, they beat Wisconsin, beat Michigan State, and you mentioned it on your website, big-underdog.com. 1-7 on the road, and they don't have a great non-con. Could that come back to bite them in the end, though?
Absolutely. Some of the Nebraska fans leave some nice notes once in a while, on X and why they're not higher. The reality is this: they, like you said, they have 2 strikes against them. The committee has been really, really steadfast that if your non-conference strength of schedule starts with a 3, right? If it's in the 300s out of 362 teams, they are going to penalize you seeding. And if you are on the bubble, you're not making the tournament. That's why I think Mississippi's in trouble too. They've been steadfast against that. So you have to work your way off of the bubble, get in safely, and then they still usually ding you one seed line for just not being competitive in the non-conference. Scheduling, with a 320 rate, you're trying to buy games, and the committee has dinged you in the past. They're entertaining, they're good, they're offensively, they're fantastic. Hoiberg gets to coach his son, that's pretty cool. But they're going to have to win any road win, anything coming up. And they have a pretty soft schedule. I think they go to Michigan too. Pretty soft schedule. They're going to have to get another road win or they will not make the tournament.
Pretty soft schedule, and they also go to Michigan. Yeah, you never would have thought that in the year 2024, but it is soft. Okay, so in your out category, it's weird to look at this and see Gonzaga in the first 4 out, but outside of the win over Kentucky, there's nothing there. Right now, it feels like they have to beat St. Mary's to close out the season and make a deep run in the WCC tournament to even have a shot.
I think that's spot on. Their season hung in the balance of there was no path other than winning the West Coast Conference tournament if they didn't beat Kentucky. So they're tied to the Cats no matter what. They did get that win on the road, which is a really impressive win. But the game that got away from them was not holding serve against St. Mary's at home. Like they never lose at the Kennel typically. And they did. They got beat at home and now they're chasing that win. And it's going to be really, really tough to win at St. Mary's. It's going to be one of those things where they're going to have kind of the really, really nice record. They're going to get to that 25 win. They're going to have the name brand of Gonzaga. It's going to depend upon a lot of those teams in the Big East are just clogging up the back end of the bubble right now. So the Villanovas, the Seton Halls, the Providences, the Butlers, they're all right there because of the number of quality wins. And a lot of that's going to come down to how many of those teams have 14 or 15 losses. Because once you get to that, it's really hard to make the tournament.
Last one. Wake Forest is in the next 4 out. They're a team that we feel here at ACC Nation should be in. Unfortunately, they just don't quite have the resume to go with it. The win over Florida is aging really, really well. I know they are in a tight one in overtime, actually, as we speak with Alabama. And Florida has been one of the hottest teams in the country lately.
Yeah.
But it feels like Wake needs at least 2 more quality wins to be in consideration. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, they've got their chance Saturday when Duke comes to town. That's their chance. And the reality is if they don't get that one, then they got Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Clemson's at home. Clemson would help a little bit. They got to beat Duke. They want to make the tournament Saturday. They got to beat Duke. That's the way the math is going to shake out for them. They can do it. They're a top 30 offense and defense, which means they play pretty skilled. But at some point, your resultant-based metrics, which right now hover around 50. So the resultant-based metrics say they're about the 50th best team. The computers say, if you look at the way they play and their style and their shot making, it's about 20. So there's a really big gap with them. They've got to close that gap, get some quality wins. Because like you said, right now it's Florida, Virginia, kind of, and that's it. But I think they've got a chance. They've got 2 really big home games against Duke and Clemson. If they get both of those, and probably one win in the ACC tournament, they probably get in.
Early on, I said that there were two teams, Wake Forest and you also mentioned Pitt, but I'm guessing that Pitt has pretty much said goodbye at this point.
The thing with Pitt is that they've been consistently inconsistent, and but they have what most teams don't have. They've gone on the road and won games. And like we've talked about, the committee has rewarded teams like that have gone and done that. They've gone to Duke and won, and they've gone to Virginia and won. NC State's that's not a bad road win either. And so those are going to kind of carry the profile a little bit longer. At some point, though, you got to hold serve at home. You got to start winning home games. And they just, 10-5 for a power school at this stage that wants to make the tournament at home, that's not good enough. Yeah. They've got to hold serve at home the rest of the way.
So somebody had to deliver the bad news, and well, we'll say that we did. So how about that? Check out the latest bracket by Jason at big-underdog.com. That's big-underdog.com. You want to check that out. Make sure that you favorite it and check it out on a regular basis, because there's going to be a lot of updates with different games and whatnot coming down the road as we get closer and closer to the tournament. We hope to have Jason back with us in some time frame here. We haven't quite figured that out yet. But it'll be maybe another 30 days or somewhere in that time frame. But like we did the original time, and then that way we'll get a nice look at what's coming up with the NCAA tournament. We'll find some slot in there that'll work out perfectly for Jason.
That sounds good.
To do that, make sure that you follow it, and if you're not following or checking out Big Underdog brackets on a regular basis, shame on you. You need to do that. I've been making notes, copious notes actually, to start building my bracket for my play, because I've got several brackets that I'm going to be throwing up this year as opposed to the last couple of years. So
yeah, we got to get into Cinderellas next time, Will. I know you love doing that. So some of the prep work, we've got some prep work already started for that question. So
okay, very good. Looking forward to the next time then. Very good. All right, Jason Carmelo from Big Underdog, and that's big-underdog.com. Are thankful and really great to have you on as always, Jason, to talk about NCAA men's basketball and your bracket, and giving us a feel for what's going on within the NCAA world and ACC as well. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks so much for having me on. Look forward to next time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky, and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.